Hi everyone, in this lesson we're going to look at masks and drawing masks on shapes. So I'm going to use the example of how to split a shape into two pieces, something that you'll quite often see in your examples. So I'm just going to start by creating a new comp. Same settings I always use, HDTV 720/25. And I'm just going to use the ellipse tool, and I want a fill. That's fine, but I don't want a stroke. So I'm just going to take the stroke number of pixels down to 0 here, so there's no stroke. Just note that this technique won't work if you're using a stroke, so just a solid shape with no outline. And I'm going to go ahead and just draw a circle on the screen. And I just want to get it into the middle of the screen as well. So I'm going to come down here to the ellipse options and open up the transform for ellipse 1 and just change the position to 0, 0, so it's in the center. Okay, the next thing I want to do is to draw a guide on the screen that's going to mark out the point where my circle is going to be sliced in half. So I'm going to come up to Window, I'm going to come up to View and click on Show Rulers, and it's going to give me these rulers around the side of my composition view here. And I just want to drag from the ruler, exactly the same as you would do in Photoshop, drag a guide down into the middle of the circle. And make sure under View that Snap to Guides is turned on, which it is. So next thing I want to do is to draw a line through the middle of the circle, which I'm going to animate sort of slicing through it later on. I'm going to do this on a new shape layer. And to draw a straight line, I'm just going to use the pen tool. Fill doesn't matter because it's not going to be a closed shape, so it won't fill anyway. And I'm just going to make the stroke, say, 2 pixels wide. And if this layer is not selected, then when I start drawing, it's going to draw the shape on a new layer. Now I want to draw it along this line, but I can't actually click on the line because then it wants me to move the ruler. So I'm just going to click below it like that, and then I'll go back to the selection tool here and I'll just drag these points and so they snap onto my guideline there. Okay, so now I've got the line running through the middle of the circle. Next thing that I want to do is to split the circle into 2 halves. And the way I'm going to do that is to use masks. Now the shape tool up here will draw masks and shapes depending on the setting that it's set to. So I'm going to select the rectangle tool, and then if you come over here on the toolbar, we've got 2 options here. One of them is Tool Creates Shape, which is what it's currently set as, which means that if I draw now, it's going to draw another shape onto the screen. But what I actually want to do is to draw a mask. So I'm just going to make sure that shape layer 1 here is selected. Let's go ahead and rename these. So this is going to be circle. And this is the line. So with the circle layer selected, got my rectangle tool, I'm going to click on Tool Create Mask up here. So now when I click to draw this rectangle, it's going to create a mask over the circle instead of adding another shape to the layer. So now on this layer here, I've just isolated 1/2 of the circle. Now to get the other half, I want that to be on a separate layer as well. So I'm going to just select this layer and then press Command D on my keyboard. Or you can go to Edit and Duplicate. Command D on a PC, it'll be Control D. And that's just going to make an exact copy of this layer in exactly the same place. So now what I want to do is to get the mask onto the other half of the circle. And there's a really easy, quick way of doing that. If I just roll out the properties of my circle 2 here, I now have a new drop down called masks because I created a mask on the layer. And it shows me all the masks on the layer, in this case just one. And I can just check this checkbox here inverted, and it will literally invert the mask. So I've now got these two layers. One of them is the bottom half of the circle, and one of them is the top half of the circle. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is to animate this line. I think at this point I can in fact hide the guide, or I can just click and drag it off the screen, and I can maybe hide my rulers as well. I don't need them anymore. Okay, so I want to animate the line sort of drawing through the circle, and I'm going to do that using a shape effect called Trim Paths. So if I roll out the line properties here, then I've got the contents, and there's my shape 1. I'm going to click on the Add button here. And this lower half of the menu is a bunch of different effects that you can add to shapes. One of them is called Trim Paths. I'm going to click on that. And Trim Paths is a very simple effect. If you roll out the options for it, you'll see it's got a start, end, and offset. And then we've got an option for multiple shapes, which we are not going to use right now because we've only got one shape. It's just the line. And you'll see if you just play with these values here, say the start percentage, it actually will wipe the line off the screen. And if you do the end percentage, it does the same thing in the opposite direction. So basically it's setting the start and the end of the line. The moment it's saying the start of the line is at 0%, which is where we placed our first vertex, and that the end of the line is going to be at 100%, which is where we placed our last vertex. But you can say, okay, the line only begins, say, 25% of the way across the path, or it ends at 75%. And you can animate these values and, in effect, get the line to draw onto the screen. So what I'm going to do is set the end value to 0% and add a keyframe. And then I'll go to, say, about half a second, and then change the end value up to 100%. So it's going to draw on like that. Then I also want it to draw off. So I can then use the start value to draw the other end of the line off the screen. So perhaps I'll start a little bit before this last keyframe, and I'll key the start value at 0, and I'll go forward about the same number of frames as I've got there. I'll change the start value to 100. So now it kind of draws through the line and off the other end. And I just want to ease these frames. So the last one there is going to be easy ease, and this one as well. I just go into my graph editor and just pull that handle back, and let's have a look, see what this looks like. I'm just going to set the end of my timeline over here so it loops. So it's looking alright. can probably be a little bit faster. I can just bring some of these keyframes in. Bring that in as well. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. So next thing is to just animate my circle kind of separating into two pieces. And I'm just going to make it sort of just sort of slide into a shape like that. So let's see, I'm just going to grab both of these layers here, and I just want to bring up the position for the layer. So instead of rolling it out and having all this stuff here and looking for position, I can just press P on my keyboard, and that will just give me the position value for these layers. Let's see, the line is cutting through the middle at about that point. I want the motion to overlap a little bit, so let's start around here. I'll just hit the stopwatch for both positions. I'll go up to 1 second, and let's see, the top half of the circle can slide this way. That's the bottom half. So this is the bottom half of the circle I'm looking at here. I'm just going to move it this way. I want them to move equal values, so this is on 640 at the moment. Let's move it down to, say, 600. And then this top part is going to get plus 40, so it'll be 680. And then I also want to ease these two last frames here. So F9 on my keyboard for easy ease. And again, go into the graph editor. And I've got the same problem here where the position value doesn't give me handles for my keyframes. So last time I showed you this problem, we went into the edit speed graph. And there you have handles. But there's another way of doing it. That I'm going to show you now. But this only works for the transform for the whole layer. It only works for this position value for the whole layer, so nothing inside the contents. You can right click on the position and say separate dimensions, and then it gives you two different values, one for X and one for Y. And at the moment the Y value is actually staying the same. It's got a keyframe on 360 there and 360 there. I'm not actually using this, so I can remove that if I want to. And let's do the same to this position value, separate dimensions, and just kill the Y animation. And now, for my X position, you'll see that I do have the handles in the value graph. So I can bring that curve in and get a really nice transition there. Let's see, perhaps I'll just pull these handles back in a little bit. There's my animation. And another thing I might want to do at some point is to actually have the shape being sliced kind of on a diagonal, so at a 45-degree angle. In which case, I'd usually start off like this, just doing it straight, sort of parallel to the edges of the screen, because it's just easier to draw shapes that way. and then take the whole animation and rotate it once I've finished. And the way I would do that is to create an object and then connect all these layers to it. And I'm going to use a null object. So I'm going to go new, null object. And the null object is really just kind of a, it's a placeholder for things like position, rotation, and scale. So you can connect things to it and then move all of those things around as a group using the null to kind of control that position. The null object is not renderable. So at render time, when you export your animation, you're not going to be able to see this, this red square here. So the way to connect these layers to it is to come over here to the Parent tab. If you can't see this, then you have to just go and look at your switches down here at the bottom. There are 3 switches that reveal these kind of properties and switches that we have up here in the timeline. The first switch here is going to give you options for things like motion blur and 3D layers and stuff that we'll look at a bit later on. And then the second switch is going to give you transfer modes, things like you know, add, multiply, overlay, and then it's going to give you track matte, and then also parent options. So the way parent works, if you're not familiar with it already, is that you pick a layer and you tell it which other layer is the parent. So for my line here, I'm going to say the parent for line is null1, which is the null object that I've just created. And now I can still move the line around. I can move the line around on its own, but if I move the null, it takes the line with it. So often the analogy of a car with a family in it is used. It's a little silly, but just to explain the idea of parenting. So in this case, the null is the dad who's driving the car, if you like. So wherever the dad goes, because he's driving, the children in the back seat have to go with him. But inside the car, the children are free to move around on their own. So I'm going to connect these other 2 layers to the null as well. And you can either select the layer and then choose the parent from the drop-down menu, or you can use this little spiral next to it. It's called a pick whip. And you click and drag from this spiral. It draws a line. You click and drag it onto the parent you want to be the layer. Sometimes it's easier really just to pick it from the list. But there's another way of doing it. So now you'll see all 3 of my shape layers here are connected to null1. So now if I move null1, the whole group of shapes comes with it, and the animation is preserved as well. So this is really nice if you've animated something, you've used up the position values, but you want to move that animation around. You create a null, you parent the shapes or your animation to the null object, and then use the null object to move it around. You can also use the null object to scale it up and down, or in our case, what we really want to do, let me just roll out the transforms here. What we want to do is to rotate. I'm going to rotate 45 degrees. Actually, let's make it minus 45. So now our animation looks like this. Just on a final note, this might be a little hard for you to see, so I'm going to zoom in really close so it's nice and obvious. When you've got, as we do here, 2 masks that are overlapping exactly, Because of the way that After Effects handles anti-aliasing, we have these sort of softened pixels in the middle, and they're kind of semi-transparent. So what we're seeing here is some of the black background poking through this tiny little division between our shapes here. And you can, if you zoom out to 100%, you can actually see this black line. So to fix that, I just need to expand one of my masks by like 1 pixel. So let's just go to circle 1 and just roll out our properties here. And let's go to masks and roll out the properties for mask 1. And we've got a few options here for different mask properties, and one of them is called mask expansion. And this really just, zoom out again, it really just expands the area of the mask around the shape that you've drawn. So if I just pull this value up, whoops, not that one, you'll see it just sort of grows it. And then if you give it a negative value, it's going to shrink it. So what I want to do is just expand this mask by 1 pixel. So I'm just going to type in 1. Now if I zoom in, you'll see that little division has gone, and I've got a nice solid shape again.